My name is Stephen Kirsting, and once again it is time for the monthly theme video critique. And February's theme was creating subject separation by controlling distances to the subject and the background. And being that this is a technical theme, I'm going to pretty much skip the grading system and really focus on technical considerations. The first image we have here is by M, and we've got a 105mm lens stopped down to f8 for sharpness, and 105 2.8 is a very sharp lens already. ISO is at 200, low enough, and 1/160th of a shutter speed, which is adequate for optimal sharpness handheld. I prefer a little more if you can get it. Okay, let's look at the image in detail. We'll look at sharpness, the primary area. Now we've got a rather short subject distance, which is going to create a shallow depth of field, which is apparent in this image. We don't have these back petals in focus. We have good focus in a lot of areas, but I do think it could probably have been just a bit crisper. I don't know if there was any wind or anything like that. A higher shutter speed might have been usable. Looking at the image in out of focus areas, we've got nice round bokeh shapes. The smaller aperture creates a rounder shape to them. We still have a bit of the bright edge, which is going to be a characteristic of the lens, and there is a bit of chromatic aberration in some areas that we could correct. Pretty pronounced right around here, the green fringing. And looking in the image here as well, at 100%, there's a bit of noise in the background. Some of that looks to be JPG artifacts, but it's a bit noisy, and we're at 100%. Now, if you printed this or view it at a smaller size, all that goes away. So it's not a big concern, but we can address those things. As far as the assignment goes, excellent background separation, and big part of that in this image is background selection. It's always a major factor, is background selection. You can't fix a bad background. You can minimize it, but you can't fix it. Here we have a uniform background, the shallow depth of field with a great background separation. Just blurred it to obliteration to where it doesn't exist. There is no bokeh to the background. So we have great separation. All right, let's look at what we could do to address some of these minor issues. We'll deal with the chromatic aberration first. And turn on the green because that's where it's at. I'm not really having the effect I want, so I'm going to spread this, include more of the green area, and okay, there it's gone away. So that's dealt with the green chromatic aberration. Alright, let's look at the noise in the background, and to help with that I'm going to cheat and turn on visualize spots, and you can really see that there's a lot of noise back here, and we can address that. We'll just bump up the luminance noise reduction and get rid of most of that. Turn the visualize spots off and zoom in, see what we've done as far. Let me undo that. Turn that off, zoom in, so we see what we've done as far as sharpness goes. So we'll step back, and we've hurt the sharpness a touch, but we can bring that back. We'll use the undo brush, which isn't actually a feature, it's a trick. I'll make the image really small. You would think that to paint the sharpness back in only where you want it would be problematic because there's so much fine detail, but it's really not that hard if you know the trick. I'm going to turn auto masking on. I'm going to make the brush as large as possible. I'm going to set the sharpness up here. We'll just go to max, see what that does. I can always adjust it later, and I'll put a little bit of clarity on it. And I'm going to use the auto masking to select areas in the whole image. So I've gotten those colors. I'll step over here, add that to it. Step down here, I'll add that to it. I'll add that. See what we've got so far. Let's add some lights. I'll add that. I'll add that. I'll add that. And it's only selecting the areas that my cross hair is attached to. Okay, I've gotten too much. I got some of the background. Undid that last one. Apparently some of the extra dark. Ooh, undo that one. I'll add this little area here, see what that does. Alright, that looks like it's pretty well selected. So we'll turn the brush off. We'll zoom in and see where our sharpness settings have gotten us. Alright, so sharpness before, sharpness after. And you can see it's actually a little more contrasty and sharp than it was before. We might want to take that clarity back out. Maybe add more. Not seeing a big difference. Right. So we've addressed the noise, and if we turn on this and visualize the spots, we shouldn't see the noise in the background because we didn't add it to the background. Alright. And then maybe with this image I would bring up shadows a little bit. Make it a little brighter because you can see we're well clear of the highlights, well clear of the shadows, just a little left of center. We don't want the lights to go too high. They're specular, so close to 195, somewhere around there. That looks pretty good to me. So this is where I would leave this image. So before and after, not a significant difference, but if you look at it close, print it large, you will see a difference as far as the chromatic aberrations and the background noise, possibly. Nice image. Here we have an image by Adrian, and we're using a 55mm lens at f8, 1/400th of a shutter speed, ISO 400. Right, so a lot of shutter speed. If it was windy, I could see that being a requirement. ISO 400, higher than optimal, but depending upon the camera, that may or may not be an issue. Looking at the image right offhand, we can see that we've got a lot of black clipping and highlight clipping in the image, and being clipped like that, there's no way to recover it, certainly not from the JPEG here. So what we can do is we can use, I'll shift click on the whites and blacks and let it set the points. It's not doing anything for blacks for some reason. Let's see what we've got. Looks like it's not going to adjust those, period. Yeah, we're not going to get much of that back, and it knew that, so it didn't adjust it automatically. Alright, we're still going to have just a touch of clipping, but less than we had before, which is going to be a little better. Alright, looking at this image closely, as far as the background goes, we don't really have specular highlights as such in order to see the bokeh characteristics. We can see some transition, color issues, not really issues, they're gamma, and it's probably in the JPEG conversion or processing. But everything looks pretty smooth in the background, nothing's harsh. We got a little kind of bokeh characteristic there, which looks roundish and smooth. So it all looks pretty good. Still, what I would say is a bit busy. We still have good separation, but it's this brighter and contrast in the background causes it to be a little busy and draw some attention away from the subject. And for me personally, I think part of that is the subject's lacking in interest for me, I guess. Let's look at the finer points in here. There's quite a bit of noise. We can emphasize that, help see it. And we can zoom out. You can see that it's just everything turned white, which is, it's all noise other than the stuff that's clipped. All right, back in, you can see how it's quite noisy, and it's visually apparent in these areas. So in areas like this, it seems pretty obvious. We could deal with some of that. We can go down here to the detail and bring luminance reduction way up, and that is going to affect overall sharpness, and we'll knock detail down a little bit. And so we have the amount of noise in the original is very, apparent here along the edges. It's just creating just some strange characteristics, and I don't know if that was sharpening originally or what. And that goes back to if we're going to sharpen, try to be selective about it, because it's in the background and everything else. Some of that could be Jpg Artifacting. So we've got and after, smoother, cleaner, and I would probably go with that for this image. We could try to bring back some sharpening, drive the sharpening up, and then holding down the Option key, we can slide it over to the right till it's only on the subject, and try to minimize the edge characteristics. You can see it's returned a bit of the noisiness in there, so that's a kind of a balance issue. So overall, the main weakness here, I think, is background selection, and for me, subject selection. But I think as far as the theme goes, of controlling the distance, shorter distance to the subject, and smaller apertures for sharpness, greater distance for the background to throw it out of the focus and provide our separation, is done pretty well. Okay, we have an image by Melissa, and we've used a 50mm lens, f5.6 ISO 100, and 1/800th of a shutter speed. And to me, this image looks a bit underexposed. We're well away from the right side, but this is a white flower, so this should be over to the right side. So first thing I would say there is perhaps metering mode. Doesn't really matter if a white subject, metering mode's not necessarily going to compensate for that, so some positive exposure compensation. If it's white, you're going to look at about 0.7 to 1 stop over what the meter thinks is right. Looking at the characteristics, we do have specular spots in the background here, and we can see that this is looking a little octagonal, hexagonal. It's due to the slightly wider aperture and just the lens characteristics, the number of blades it has, and how sharp that background characteristic is. A smaller aperture makes the sides shorter, which makes the characteristic rounder, and then throwing it more out of focus makes it rounder. So we have a few of those. This one's a little more out of focus, looking a little rounder. This one's a little more in focus, showing a bit more of the aperture blade characteristics. But other than that, it's pretty smooth across. We don't have a strong edge, bright or dark. All of our characteristics back here look pretty good. So this lens at f5.6 is looking pretty good. The only way we'd get much better. Maybe stop down slightly and the background a little further out. If we wanted to throw that more out of focus, so a little greater background distance. Obviously, the only way to do that would be to probably move the flower or select a different flower or something along those lines. Looking at the image, it's sharp, very sharp. The only thing to me is it's a bit underexposed. And this is going to be a tough one because we've got some whites in here that are, you know, we're looking, so if we just bring the exposure up on this, chances are it's going to start looking too flat. I'll bring the contrast up a bit. Try to keep those speculars, bring up the shadows a bit. Bring down the whites a bit. Let's see what this looks like comparison. So we're getting a little better. We're not losing the detail. A little brighter. And about the only thing I could do for these areas would be exposure adjustment using the brush. Go in here. We'll bring the exposure up a bit. That's probably a lot. And we'll use auto masking. Turn the flow down a bit. Turn the feather up. Well, I don't need feather for auto masking. We'll just click on those. Again, click on it again. Increase the density. So we brought those areas up without hurting the other areas too much. We'll grab a new brush and we're going to fix this exposure, bring up the contrast. For this one, I'm going to switch to a feathered brush. Just bring out those details in here a little bit. All right. You know, I think we need to take some of the blue out of that areas. So that's actually what we're going to do is I'm going to grab this. I'm going to find that adjustment, and then we're going to take saturation down. Pull a little of that blue out of it, make it a little whiter. I think that should have helped. And if we really wanted to, we can go down here to saturation. We can take luminance. We'll bring this area up. And I'm just using a scroll up effect to bring that selected color up in brightness. And then we can get rid of some noise back here. That's pretty good. Bring the detail down just a little bit, and then right where we want it, we will add sharpness back into those areas. And again, we could auto mask this to make our life a little easier if we wanted to. But really, this is the only area that matters. It's easy enough to do this manually. All right. See what happens if I bring that sharpness higher. Where's that brush at? And we can continue going over it for greater opacity or increase the flow to have a greater effect. But I think that's adequate. So before, just a bit underexposed. After, and overall, pretty nice image. Nice job. Okay, here we have a second image by Melissa. And again, the settings look identical: 50mm f5.6, ISO 100, 1/800th of a shutter speed. And I'm going to assume this is the infamous extension tube attached to the 50mm, allowing the macro-ish close-up image. And that would count as controlling subject distance in relation to the background, creating a shallow depth of field. And if we look at the image, there's less noise in the background, even though the settings are the same. And that is due to the background being brighter. The noise in the dark areas is not necessarily ISO noise, it is a lack of light noise. It's sensor noise, shot noise, due to a lack of light coming from dark areas. So we have less of it in this because we have less dark areas, even though both images were at the minimum ISO. So lesson there is, in a brighter situation, brighter scenes, you can use higher ISOs to enable even higher shutter speeds if you choose, without having the same penalty ISO noise that you get in darker scenes. As far as this image goes, it looks reasonably sharp. To me, the depth of field is a bit shallow. I would, unless you wanted me to focus just here on this portion, but we have a lot going on here. So if it's not out of focus enough to be not gathering attention. So in this case, I think stopping down even further, assuming you had the stability, calm winds, that kind of stuff, to use a lower shutter speed, or even maybe a higher ISO, because as I said, it's a brighter scene. It doesn't contribute noise as much. We have a little bit around some edges that could be sharpening, causing that. That's generally where it shows first, but it doesn't look bad, and it's just in a few areas. So if I were to worry about that, I would take that out with a brush instead of globally, just on these edges right in here. But overall, for me, it meets the theme, meets the requirements, and because there's so little detail in the background, the lens specific characteristics, we're not seeing the shape of the aperture, we're not seeing the bokeh characteristics of a point of light, light edges, dark edges, that kind of stuff. So with a background choice selection, the lens characteristics as far as bokeh and out of focus stuff doesn't matter as much, and we're seeing that in this image. Okay, this image is by Knitting, and we've got a pretty bird, blue bird, and 300mm 70-300 stop down almost 2 stops to f7.1, ISO 250, 1/640th of a second. And right off the bat, we can see that the out of focus points quite large, but they're smooth, they're round, they got a pretty round shape. They're not as specular, they're not as small, so it's not as critical, but you can see that they stand out a bit. So in this case, you've got a variable zoom, variable aperture. It's definitely going to require stop down a bit to gain some sharpness for the zoom. Probably f8 would be around ideal, maybe even f11, but that would have made these smaller and sharper and more distracting. So I think this is a decent compromise, and about the only thing could do better would be have a better background to start with, or better lighting so that light wasn't coming through towards the camera. If these points were not as much light, there wouldn't be as much contrast. All right, looking at the image, quality-wise, it looks sharp. I don't really see significant signs of chromatic aberration or anything like that. And a lot of that's because it's not hard backlight. You got that kind of, it looks like there's a bit of an edge to that. It looks like it probably did have some chromatic aberration that was already dealt with, because you can change the color of the chromatic aberration, but you can't really get rid of it. The line's going to be there. And I see a little bit of line, so I think there probably was a little bit that was already dealt with. On my computer, the bird's a bit dark, just a bit dark. And I think I would bring up the shadows on this one. Bring those up. You can see what that really does here for the eye. Makes that stand out quite a bit. So you can see the iris and everything. Brings out the blues a little more. Brings this up a bit. Now if you didn't want this part here to lighten up like it did, we can use a brush and we'll take a little exposure out of it. Make it large, auto masking. Yeah, let's turn that flow up a bit. Do that again. We can adjust this. Make that wing, whoops, didn't want that one. Bring that wing back down to a darker color. And if we wanted to, get a new brush. And we will bring that exposure up. In that area. And we'll get rid of it here. So that's about all I would do with this that would be different. So we started there, a little darker in the eye, the face, and the chest area. Just bring that up a bit, make it stand out. And I like this image. Nice job. Here we have an image by Adrian. It's a 17-55 2.8 zoom at 55 millimeters, f8, ISO 100, 1/160th of a second. So minimum ISO, plenty of shutter speed, stop down for sharpness. That all works pretty well for me. Off the bat, background chosen for what it did in the globe, which is pretty cool. And drop the background to where it's not too distracting. And I don't know what I could do better other than maybe a little different angle to drop this line here down lower. And I'm not exactly certain what that would have done to the reflection inversion in the globe. I would look at that, but I don't know that it'd be better or worse. I'm pretty sure it would do the exact opposite here. Right, the horizon line is not straight. Looking at the qualities, I don't see anything to distinguish. Bokeh characteristics, everything's out of focus, everything's smooth. I don't really see chromatic aberrations. Again, I'm seeing what looks like probably over sharpening in the edges there. Doesn't seem bad in the details areas, and noise can come across as sharpness sometimes in fine details. We've got clipping, we've got a lot of dark shadow clipping, a lot of highlight clipping, and in this one, you know, we could do auto tune, auto adjust the whites, and it goes right to -100. Blacks it's not going to adjust because it can't recover those. There's just nothing there. Even if we went to max, they're still going to stay the way they were. So I'm going to return that. You can see how this kind of gets, I don't know, granular. You can return this and start by pulling highlights. Pull the highlights way down, and then I'll bring the whites up a bit. So now we've gotten rid of the clipping, but it looks better, in my opinion, than the auto white adjustment, going -100 on whites. This looks a little more natural to me. So I would do that. Otherwise, with this image, I don't know what I would do. It's neat. Unfortunately for me, this portion of the background, the carpet it's on, which is essential for the image itself or the subject, kind of detracts from the subject. So I don't really know what I'd do differently. It's a neat idea. I like the reflection. You know, for this, maybe cut it out, blur the crap out of the background, and then put it back in. Might do something like that. But as far as what you could do in camera, I think this is a neat idea, done pretty well, and I don't have any real suggestions for it. Just, I'm thinking tone down the sharpening a bit so we don't get all that granular edges that you're seeing here. Okay. This image is by Brad, and we have a 50mm f1.8 stopped down to 3.5, so stop and a half or so. 1/200th ISO 100, so plenty of shutter speed. Stop down just a bit for sharpness, probably not as far as optimal. 4.5, 5.6 is probably going to be a little sharper. Not that I can see offhand that it's affected the image. ISO is low, plenty of shutter speed for taking this handheld. Looking at the image, IQ wise, quality settings wise, it looks pretty sharp, particularly here in the sharpest point of depth of field. Focuses on the eyes good, I like that. Depth of field's still on the shallow side for the subject, but we're doing well. We've got nose to the eyes anyways. The background is shallow enough that the couch isn't really a major distractor. You know, it's a dark blob in the corner. I would have composed it so it wasn't there rather than trying to blur it out, but it's not a major detractor. And of course you could clone that out. Basically take this corner from this side, put it over there, and try to get rid of the dark contrast there. Alright, got some lines here. Not sure what that's from. Not a major problem, but you know, it's running into the head. Nice backlighting, nice catch light from the carpet. You actually see his own shadow here, which, you know, that's a little distracting to me, and I think the biggest distractor here is the pink ball. You know, it's the dog's toy, I understand, and the dog probably loves the pink ball, but it's a bright spot of color in an image that's otherwise kind of monotone, or even, you know, kind of black and whitish without that ball. So it really does have a lot of weight. It's color contrast. So that ball draws more attention than is ideal. Now if you move the ball, I don't know if the dog would have stayed there, but I think the ball's a little bit of a negative to the image. Exposure wise, I think it's done well, particularly, you know, considering backlight brightness on the carpet here. We don't have clipping of darks or lights, so exposure was handled well. Yeah, I don't know that the camera would have done this on its own, so good job there. I think I would bring up shadows. What I would try to do is reduce some of this contrast that's in the image where I don't want it. On the carpet, this hard shadow, I don't like that as much. It's such a hard contrast, so I would preferably not had it, but we can try to reduce it, minimize it. We'll bring up some shadows and bring down the contrast a bit. And keep the whites down here a little bit. I'm going to bring down the blacks a little bit. Just a bit. See what that did for us. Yeah, I like that better overall. I would get rid of some of it here. I would just bump the contrast back up. Just in a few spots where we wanted it. That should make the dark areas darker. Light areas a little lighter. See what that did for us. Seeing a lot of difference. Something around there. Just a touch. But yeah, I like that a little better. It's taken some of the weight out of this corner. It's brought out the eyes a little more. Reduced the weight of the shadow here. And I think it works just a little better this way. But all in all, nice picture. I would just get rid of the ball, and I would try to compose this so that the chair wasn't there, couch, and we didn't have quite as harsh of a shadow. So not as strong a backlight, or not as light a carpet to where the shadow stands out as strongly. You got to work with what you got. So overall, nice job. And in our last image, also by Brad, we have a picture of a flower. Very similar settings, except for a much lower shutter speed and a higher ISO. And, well, I don't think it was handheld necessarily, but it has affected the image. Now, because it's a low light image, there's going to be more noise in the background, and that's going to be compounded by going to the higher ISO. Not much to be done about it. Sharpness. It doesn't seem terribly sharp anywhere. So if this was handheld, that would certainly be the problem, contributing anyways. And looking at the characteristics of this lens, 3.5, got a bit of backlighting. Bokeh characteristics, we've got the octagonal shape. Looks like a 7-blade, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7-bladed aperture, which stop down makes a nice round blur. And in this case, you can kind of see where if it blurs out further, even the same aperture, more out of focus, it is rounder. The more in focus, the more distinct the edges are. Not entirely certain what's going on here. The bokeh is pretty uniform in brightness across. It looks like to me like there might be doubling going on here, or even tripling, because this doesn't, I don't know, maybe there were that many points of light, or maybe it's reflecting off the sensor back onto a filter or lens element. A UV filter can do that, cause that kind of effect. So I don't know if there was really that much going on back there or not. In any case, while it's out of focus and the bokeh balls, I don't feel they really add to the image. And the biggest issue for me is it's not particularly sharp anywhere. So as far as settings go, it's tough. It's tough. I would stop down, put it on a tripod, and use a lower ISO. Take a long shutter speed. This thing's not going anywhere. Only thing I can see to do with this Bring down the highlights. Bring that down. Maybe increase the contrast. I don't know, it seems a little saturated to me. Take a little vibrance out of it. Take some vibrance out and put some saturation back in. Get a little more balanced. I don't know. But there's really not much hope for this image, just because I can't put in sharpness and detail. I could try, but it won't be worth it. And we could kill all the noise if we wanted to. It's not going to hurt the image. Kick it up to, you know, something in that range. 25 to 35 would be adequate for printing and smaller display in general. As high as 50 is not really going to hurt the image because there wasn't a lot of sharpness to start with. It looks smoother and overall. Biggest, like I said, issue to me, looks like it was handheld, or even if it was on a tripod, didn't use all the tricks, and you know, could have used a lower ISO if you used the tripod and a longer shutter speed. It wouldn't have hurt. Stop down, I don't think you would make this background too in focus, so 4 or 5. These bokeh balls, I guess, you know, points of light would be rounder, and I don't think you would detract with this background too much. Hard to say without actually doing it. Alright, that's it for February's theme. Next month's theme is background separation using long focal lengths, and basically we have a couple examples that verge on that here. We've got long focal length that Nitin used, 300mm, so you can see how it makes the background characteristics. We've got this image here by M, longer focal length, causing the shallower depth of field along with shorter working distances. So this next assignment, we're going to combine all 3 aspects using a not necessarily wide aperture, but a sharp aperture, long focal length, shorter working distances, longer background distances, and see if we can't really come up with some great isolation like this image here. And again, one of the key factors here is going to be background selection. Obviously, if it's a white background, you don't have to get rid of anything because there's nothing there, and that's not the goal either. Alright, till next time, have a great day, and I'll see you again.